Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sophomore Sem. So, we've now addressed what sort of chemical careers you might be interested in and what sort of research you might want to go ahead and use to pursue those further ideas and careers. However, it turns out that in order to get a lot of research jobs, you need to build up a resume. So, today we're going to be talking about that dreaded thing, one of our first assignments, building up a resume or a CV for any job applications for any research you might want to do in the future. So, again, one of the big things that is a good way to kind of assess where your skills are currently at and which ones you might want to build in order to get good jobs after you graduate, or maybe even a good REU in the next year or two, is to build up your CV and see what your strengths and weaknesses are. And traditionally, these documents are just going to be mostly used as a method for your employer to know what sort of skills you offer and how that might compare to your competition. But we typically think about having a good resume on file as a good way to essentially guarantee your ability to secure some sort of research experience or an internship, or essentially help keep you employed in the future. However, one of the things I want you to be very aware of is, especially in academia, we don't just use the classic resume that people talk about in business. We also have something called the curriculum vitae, more commonly known as the CV. And you should essentially be aware of the two differences, though at this point they might be fairly similar to each other for what you're doing. So, you've probably had to build a resume sometime in high school or maybe even to get a job here in college. Now, one of the big things you should keep in mind about a resume is that it's going to be specifically used to target your current job market. So the resume you build to go get a job at a local grocery store should be very different from the resume that you build in order to get a research job. One of the other important things to remember about a resume is you want to keep it short, um, typically less than 2 pages, because your typical employer is going to be reading through a large stack of them, 50 or more. So he wants to essentially be able to quickly see what are the key specific skills or background that you have that makes you separate from the whole rest of the stack. So start with whatever is the most important and try and avoid being long-winded, because honestly, most employers are going to be uh, skimming your resume for what they really care about. So again, if you're looking for a job or an internship, this is typically what you're going to prepare. This stands in slightly contrast to the CV. So the CV is specifically targeted towards academia. So if you're looking at an REU at an academic institution, you might want to start transforming your resume to a CV. In addition, a CV has no formal page limit, and instead the emphasis should be to try and provide a complete list of everything you've done, which means they can often get quite long. Also, there tends to be less of an emphasis on skill, more of an emphasis on what you've done and what your publications are. So as a consequence, at this point in your career, you're probably going to start by building a resume, even if you're working towards academia. But try and be aware of what elements a CV might have, because you might want to slowly start moving your resume more over to a CV style if you're interested in more academic research and graduate school. So, again, a resume should try and be short and concise, and it's going to want to include a smaller set of important information. Most important is your contact info. So you're going to want to make sure that this is information that any employer can actually use to contact you, because even though you may be expecting an email or a phone call, you may end up getting something more like snail mail. Furthermore, something that's more of exclusive to a resume is the idea of an objective. So here's the thing you should keep in mind. Your objective probably will need to change based on what specific research you're doing, because you're going to want to emphasize why this specific job. So let's say you're putting out 50 applications to 50 different research projects. An employer can will be much more invested in somebody who lists something about that specific research job that might be that shows that you took the time to be interested. Whether this is something like being interested in a specific type of equipment they do, or specific compound that they're trying to synthesize, or even just a general area of research like Alzheimer's research or energy or fuels. So again, if you put in a little bit of time to tailor your resume, you can do a lot of good for your prospects. Also, the classic list of what education you've received. So in this case, you're going to want to usually list where you got your high school degree, as well as commenting how far you've managed to get in your current educational level. And this may include any specific relevant classes for whatever job you're applying for. So this may be something like it's important to note whether or not you've had organic chemistry lab if you want to do organic research. And this is one of the big standouts of a resume over a CV is what are your skills? And this is an important one to emphasize as we go from, say, a typical job CV to more of a chemistry-based CV is going to be what specific skills do you bring? So you're going to want to particularly emphasize any lab skills that you have and any analysis techniques you know. So if you know any specific analysis packages, like even if it's something as simple as Excel, but particularly if it's something as complicated as a stats package like R, or a specific chemistry modeling program like Gaussian or Chimera. Make sure to list this under your skills. But make sure to specifically emphasize any sort of instrumentation you have familiarity with, especially if this is something like an NMR, an IR, or a GC, because this is very attractive for a lot of employers. And then we get back to the traditional resume bread and butter. What sort of jobs have you previously held? This actually is important to note that this can include things that may not be paid work, such as an unpaid internship or research in somebody's lab. And then we have our good old friend volunteer work. So if you do any volunteer work through a special organization, make sure to include this. And maybe any special training that might not amount to something like a class, such as if you've had any specific in-services or any special certifications. For example, if you have any certifications for handling government documents, this can be very useful if you're applying for a government job. And then our good old friends of resume padding, of any awards, or especially at this point, things like scholarships that you've received, and any sort of professional affiliations. So good ones to keep in mind at this point, maybe if you're a member of ACS, or if you are part of the AXE fraternity, as these can be looking very good. And at this point, you probably don't have any yet, but this becomes more important the later in your career you get. Make sure you have a full list up to date of any publications. And at this point, you might be hopefully starting to do more academic presentations, which is often listed along with your publications. Now again, resume has a lot of information you're trying to include, but don't forget to try and keep it short and concise so that it's very easy for an employer to find exactly what they want. So this is going to stand slightly in contrast to the CV, which is going to be a little bit longer. 3 to 5 pages is fairly common, and it has some of the same information, like your contact information. But you may notice that education starts to come a little bit earlier in the list of important things, and then honors and awards. And especially if you're looking at, as you get into grad school, teaching experience can become much more important, and research experience becomes much more important than general employment history. Then again, special training is still there, and conferences and presentations are also very important to list in detail. And then this one also becomes important: publications and professional affiliations. So you may notice that in general, there isn't a big difference in between what material is covered, but there's certain things that that a resume includes that a CV doesn't, and vice versa. Again, you may notice that listing of skills tends to be de-emphasized in a CV, and uh, education and publications, as well as teaching and research, start coming much more towards the front. So at this point in your career, you're probably going to be looking more at making a resume more tailored towards academic experience, but hopefully by the end of your time at Truman, you might be able to start building more of a CV style. So in the next couple weeks, you will need to prepare your own resume or CV. There are several lists, several templates for you to try and use to get started on building your own CV or resume if you don't already have one. However, one of the other things that is worth noting is if you have a hard time finding out where you want to get started, there's also a list of several example CVs that help you show more what a typical chemistry type CV looks like. So for example, let's go ahead and walk through a CV, an example CV put out by the ACS. So again, one of the things you may notice is that we tend at an entry level bachelor's sort of CV. This looks a little bit more like a resume, where we start off with a key objective and then move towards education and experience, which tends to emphasize research and teaching experience. Then here it lists computer experience. This will probably want to more emphasize general skills, specifically any type of equipment that you know how to use, such as for this case, probably emphasizing things such as knowing how to do X-ray and magnetic accessibility analysis, as well as NMR, UV vis, and IR spec, because these are all very useful skills. And again, make sure to list any coursework that might be specifically relevant to whatever job you're applying for. So this may be, for example, if you're going into a bioanalysis program, things like graduate level biochem and instrumental analysis and bioanalysis, as these can become very relevant and highly sought after skills, depending on exactly what job you're looking for. And again, the traditional list of awards, extracurriculars, and references. So again, hopefully none of this is too surprising, but please let me know if you have any specific questions on what you can do to try and tailor your CV. But as you may have noticed, make sure to emphasize the most exactly what's going to be relevant for the exact job or research opportunity that you're applying for. So good luck on trying to write out your own resume. Until next time, take care.